All right, here we go. 1950s notes. Harry S. Truman is the 33rd President of the United States. Truman politics. He established the Fair Deal and increased minimum wage and provided for uh, aid for the agriculture and education. During his time, the 22nd Amendment limits presidents' terms to two. This is in response to FDR being president four times in a row. Eisenhower gets elected next. He is the supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe during World War II, so he was pretty famous. His politics was modern republicanism, which is a person who is conservative in money, liberal with human beings. He expanded Social Security, and he didn't want the military industrial complex, meaning the military running our government. Economy. During the 50s, the value of the dollar changes. The price controls are lifted, inflation is increased, and workers demand higher wages. Taft-Hartley Act limits the power of unions. It starts the start of strikes and wage hikes in the service industry. We're seeing more and more white collar jobs. Now, white collar job is where you dress up to go to work, you shower before you work. Blue collar job is a job where you wear a uniform, you usually get dirty, and you shower after work. There's a shift from manufacturing to service industry jobs. Now, those are not necessarily white collar jobs, but service industry jobs. That's really important to keep in mind that. Consumerism, buying goods and services that are not needed. This is encouraged by universal and targeted advertising. Stores are increasingly issuing credit cards so people can buy on charge, on credit. Planned obsolescence, that phone going out of the latest thing is old, so you want to buy the new thing. That starts in the 50s. Marriage age decreases because everybody's coming back from the war and they want to get married. The number of divorces increases. The number of babies increases. This era is known as the baby boom era. Life expectancy increases. One example of that is Jonas Salk developed the polio vaccine, and it saved a lot of lives. Geography, white flight, the movement of Caucasians to the suburbs. Levitt towns, mass production of houses with specialized teams. They could build one house every 16 minutes. Think about that. Suburbia, this is where the houses are being built. They're just outside the city. And there's this huge homogenization. Houses are just the same, right? We see the same restaurants popping up. This is the era when McDonald's comes into being, and there's a McDonald's just like every other McDonald's in every city. Culture, it's an auto industry, right? This is when the big three come into power. There's no public transport to the suburbs, so you need a car. Planned obsolescence, we need to have the latest model of the car out every year. The government supported this by building highways and the interstate system, right? Service jobs, things like selling cars. Again, not necessarily a white collar job, but a different sort of job. Pop culture. This is the dawn of rock and roll. First time we've ever heard this term before. Little Richard and Elvis. We have DJs who are disc jockeys, people like Alan Freed who played rock and roll records on the radio. Sock hops were held for teenagers. They would go to dance together. Inventions. We have a computer made with a transistor radio, like they had those little tiny transistor radios we're going to talk about. Dishwashers, refrigerators, self-cleaning ovens, televisions. Now, this is a mind-boggling number. American homes with TVs increased from 9% in 1950 to 86%, meaning only 9% of the homes had TVs in 1950. 86 had them in 1959, less than a decade later. Record players enables kids to listen to this brand new music, this rock and roll. Transistor radios, they could bring these radios with them and they could afford to buy them because teenagers are getting jobs. They become independent from their parents, no longer listening to what their parents listen to. Advertisement, the age of targeted advertisements, branding and logos, theme songs. Minorities didn't do quite so well during the 1950s. Women, college rates decreased for women. There's a huge difference in pay based on gender, race. Now, the civil rights movement begins, which is a good thing, but the movement didn't happen very quickly. We have two major things that happened in the 1950s. One is the desegregation of the military, that's actually in 1948. And then two is the desegregation of public education, Brown versus the Board of Education. Inner city income shows this vast amount of inequality. All right, nonconformity, just ignore this, read in pairs, etc. Like other teens in the 1950s, the lady they're talking about begins listening to the radio. The new radio, or the new music, is rock and roll. Okay, she discovered that beyond her suburb lay a universe rather different from the safe, predictable world she had grown up in. She began to question what the expectations were of her and what she should think and behave. This is the age of conformity, right? Everybody in the 50s was supposed to be the same. Talked about John Updike's poem, Suburbia. I drive my car to the supermarket. That the way I take is super high. The super lot is where I park. The super suds is what I buy. Super salesmen sell me tonic. Super tone O for relief. Planes I ride in are supersonic. In trains, I'm like a super chief. And this is his poem, Superman, in 1954. Critics saw suburbia as a wasteland of conformity and materialism, or this preoccupation with the pursuit of wealth, right? We want to have more than our neighbors do. We want to have more and more. In their eyes, little good could come of things that were in the suburbs. In an influential book, The Organization Man, sociologist William White offered a different view of the suburbs. He saw them as a packaged villages that have become the dormitory of the generation of the organization men. These organization men were employees of large corporations or government bureaucracies. White wrote of them. They were not workers in the usual sense of the word. These were people who were not only working for the organizations, the ones I'm talking about belonged to it as well. They were the ones of the middle class who have left home spiritually as well as physically to take the vows of the organization life. Few aspects of middle class life drew more criticism than television. In the early 50s, television brought high culture, meaning works of arts and plays, and high esteem. However, by the 60s, shows were becoming just simply entertainment. They saw the television as the idiot box, right? They also worried about the isolating effects. Even though you're watching the same show, you're watching it by yourself. We kind of know a little bit about that now. Beneath the surface of the widespread conformity, there were many currents of nonconformity. One author was a man by the name of Jack Kerouac. He wrote many books. This excerpt is from the Dharma Bums. He also wrote On the Road. Kerouac was part of the group of writers and poets who created the beat movement. The term beat has a double meaning. It could mean beaten down, but it also was short for beatific or blissfully happy. The beat movement began in New York City's Greenwich Village and then spread to San Francisco. Herb Kahn, a San Francisco columnist, called the members of the movement beatniks, and the name stuck. Beatniks rejected all forms of convention, meaning customary ways of living. They shunned traditional 9-to-5 jobs and the materialism of the American life. Beat writers made significant contributions to American literature. They often use this stream of consciousness, a writing technique in which thoughts are stream of consciousness as if flowing from the character's mind right onto the paper. Their vivid, image-filled sentences go on for pages without stopping. Many literary critics praised the beat writings, and more conventional readers were sometimes offended by it. Police raided the San Francisco bookstore on the grounds that The book Howl by Allen Ginsberg was obscene or morally offensive. Teenagers were growing up in the 1950s, created another current of nonconformity, a youth culture, right? They're separate from their parents. Teens rebelled against the world of their parents, the music they listened to, the dances they danced, the movies they watched, and the slang they used, meaning like the common language. Two factors supported the growth of youth culture. One was the sheer number of baby boomers entering adolescence. Those are kids who are born post World War II. By the 1956, there were 13 million teenagers in the United States. The other was the affluence, meaning that the cash they earned from their part-time jobs and allowances meant they had more money to spend than ever before. Hollywood caters to this. We have Rebel Without a Cause, where James Dean, an actor, played an intense and brooding young misfit. The Wild One featured Marlon Brando, you probably know him as the Godfather, as a rebellious motorcycle gang leader. When a girl in the film asked him what he's rebelling against, his answer was, "What do you got?" Teenagers also developed their own language. Big daddies were older people who would not understand them. Boss meant great. Threads were clothes. A person who was radioactive was very popular. Phrases like "I'm on cloud nine," "cool it," and "don't have a cow" started in 50s slang. Many parents were horrified by the new comics. Their concerns were given voice by the psychologist Frederick Wertham in the 1954 book called The Seduction of the Innocent. Wertham complained that the values such as trust, loyalty, confidence, solidarity, sympathy, charity, and compassion are ridiculed in comic books. He also argued that comic books had become a how-to book for future criminals. In the art world, rebellion against convention took other forms. Like beat writers, some painters were creating art that was vivid, unstructured, and not bound by any rules. Painters formed a school of art known as abstract expressionism. The art was abstract because it seldom depicted or showed recognizable art objects. Look up Jackson Pollock and Pablo Picasso down below. You can see there's Pollock and there's Picasso. All right, to Americas. So we have a division of America. In 62, a new book called The Other America jolted the nation out of its complacency. Written by social activist Michael Harrington, the book described two Americas. One affluent, meaning they had wealth, and the other impoverished, meaning they were poor. Other Americans generated a national the other America generated a national discussion about the responsibility of the government to address the gross inequalities in the American society. Most people understand poverty as the lack of means, money, material goods, and resources to live decently. But what it doesn't mean, um, but what does it mean to live decently? There has never been a single standard. We think of poor depends on where we live. For much of the US, Americans felt poverty was much of a moral condition as an economic problem. They looked down on people known as paupers who did not work and who lived on public charity. Many viewed pauperism or dependency on public assistance as moral failing. Pauperism was a consequence of willful error, wrote a leading clergyman of 1834. Remember, this is different, of shameful indolence or laziness of a vicious habit. Now, times are changing. In the late 1800s, social scientists began to examine poverty more objectively, viewing it as an economic rather than moral item. For the first time, they defined poverty as a lack of income. They used the term poverty line to refer to the minimum amount of income one would need to meet basic needs. However, scholars disagreed on exactly where to draw the poverty line. In post-war America, the invisible class, by the end of the 1950s, about 1 in 4 Americans lived below the poverty line. Harrington contended the movement of middle-class families to suburbia after World War II was one of the reasons for the general lack of knowledge about America's poor. America's middle-class workers commuting, meaning traveling by car, to urban business districts seldom encountered poor people they left behind in the old city neighborhoods. The availability of inexpensive clothing helped to hide the poor. Age was another factor. that made poor hard to see. Elderly poor people seldom strayed from their